The isolation you're feeling has a purpose. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung. In a world that constantly pulls us outward, isolation may feel like punishment. But what if it's a sacred invitation? In today's video from Spiritual Wisdom, we'll explore why the silence, the separation, and the solitude you've been experiencing might be part of a deeper transformation. Jung believed that before the soul can awaken, it must pass through the fires of inner disconnection. As you watch, ask yourself, is your loneliness actually leading you home to yourself? If you've ever felt like you were being pulled away from everything familiar, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's dive into the purpose behind the pain and find the power in our solitude. 1. Isolation is sacred, not punishment. What you're experiencing isn't rejection. It's a sacred transformation, a spiritual initiation disguised as isolation. Carl Jung understood that the soul cannot awaken while it's still entangled in the illusions of the false self. That false self built on roles, expectations, and the need for validation must dissolve before the real you can emerge. And that dissolution rarely comes gently. It comes through silence, through separation, through spaces once full that now echo with emptiness. But this emptiness isn't a void, it's sacred space. When life removes people, places, and familiar comforts from your reach, it's not punishing you, it's preparing you. Your soul is being set apart, not cast aside. You are not being forgotten, you are being refined. Jung believed that real transformation doesn't begin with adding things, it begins with letting go. Letting go of people who no longer resonate with your truth. Letting go of identities that no longer fit the shape of your soul. Letting go of habits that kept you comfortably asleep. And this letting go often leaves you in a place of stillness so raw it feels like abandonment. But that's only because you're being weaned off the need for external validation. This sacred stillness teaches you to listen not to the world, but to your own soul. The ache you feel isn't punishment, it's the stretch of expansion. It's the soul stepping out of the skin of its former self, learning to breathe in a new dimension of truth. And in this space, everything hidden becomes visible. You begin to see how much of your life was shaped by fear, approval, and performance. You notice the ways you betrayed your own soul just to feel accepted. You start to remember that real love doesn't require shrinking. Real belonging doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. These revelations don't arrive in noise. They arrive in silence, in isolation, when the world stops applauding and all you're left with is your own breath, your own thoughts, your own energy. That's where the soul begins to speak again, not with words, but with knowing. And you start to feel that you were never meant to be like them. You were meant to become you. That's why things fell apart. That's why they left. That's why the door closed. Not because you weren't worthy, but because you were outgrowing what could no longer hold you. The discomfort is a sign that something truer is taking shape inside you. Your soul is returning to itself. You are being made whole, not through addition, but through sacred subtraction. You are becoming aligned, not with what the world says you should be, but with what your spirit has always been. And that is the real reason for the isolation. It's not exile, it's elevation. 2. Phase 1. The ache begins quietly. You begin to notice something's off. Not in a dramatic way, but subtly, like a song that's slightly out of tune. Conversations feel hollow. Your daily routine becomes robotic, and smiles start to feel performative. You're not depressed. You're not ungrateful. You're simply misaligned. Carl Jung called this the death of the persona, the mask you've worn for years to fit in, to be accepted, to survive. It's cracking. And with that fracture, something deeper starts to stir. Your soul is aching to return to its truth. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in slowly. What once made you feel alive now leaves you empty. The shows you used to binge feel pointless. The group chats go mute. You start craving silence, not out of avoidance, but because the noise no longer resonates with who you're becoming. This is individuation, not a trendy term for self-care, but a profound spiritual process where you are no longer content performing who you were told to be. Instead, you begin to seek who you really are beneath the roles, expectations, and conditioning. There was a man in his 40s who shared that he woke up one morning and couldn't recognize his own life. He had done everything right: a respectable job, a good marriage, a circle of friends, but none of it felt like his. He said it was like waking up inside a costume he never chose. That was the beginning of his unraveling. But Carl Jung would argue it was actually his awakening. When your soul no longer wants to play a character, life begins to pull away everything that keeps you in costume. You might feel people slipping away, invitations drying up, doors closing without explanation. It may look like rejection, but Jung taught it is redirection, your life recalibrating to match your authentic frequency. And it's painful, yes, because you're grieving something you can't quite name. But it's not grief for a person or a job. It's grief for the version of yourself you never got to be. The silence you now feel is not empty. It's sacred. The spaces that once demanded your energy now return it to you. You start seeing how much of your life was spent performing for others' comfort. And now, stripped of the noise, the rituals, the expectations, you begin hearing your own voice. It's quieter than you expected, and yet it carries a clarity that's undeniable. Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And this is what you're doing awakening, not in a glamorous movie montage way, but in the quiet, lonely, confusing wilderness of your soul. The path forward is not about rebuilding what you had. It's about birthing something new from the ashes of who you were pretending to be. The ache you feel is not a flaw. It's a compass. It's your inner world refusing to be ignored any longer. And though the process will isolate you, that isolation is a cocoon, not a cage. Let the conversations fall silent. Let the routines dissolve. Let the loneliness speak, because something sacred is happening beneath the surface. Carl Jung believed that the most important task of any human soul is to become who they truly are. And that cannot happen until everything false has been stripped away. So don't rush to fill the silence. Sit with it. Let it shape you. The isolation you're feeling is not the end. It's the invitation. It's the soul's return to the self. 3. Phase 2. Dismantling the false life. When everything around you starts to crumble, your job, your relationships, your carefully crafted roles, it doesn't mean you failed. It means your soul is waking up. The universe, in its divine intelligence, is stripping away every piece of the life you built on compromise, fear, and false identity. It feels like collapse, but it's actually spiritual liberation. Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." What feels like destruction is really a sacred reconstruction. You're not being punished, you're being pulled into alignment. This is phase 2 of transformation, the dismantling of the false life. The version of you that was built to survive, to please others, to meet society's expectations, is being dismantled, not because you're broken, but because you're finally ready to become real. The universe is ruthless in its love when it decides you're ready to evolve. It will take the job that was never meant to define you, remove the relationship that kept you small, and close doors you once begged to stay open. You're not losing your life, you're losing the illusion. This is the spiritual initiation. No one talks about the silent, sacred burning of the old self. And it hurts, because the roles you played gave you identity. The connections you maintained gave you security. But now, the soul is demanding truth, not comfort. And the truth is, if it was real, it wouldn't fall apart. If it was aligned, it would stay. Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that privilege often begins with profound loss. You may feel like you're disappearing. You may feel unseen, unimportant, abandoned. But what's really happening is that you're becoming invisible to the systems that only recognized your mask. As you shed who you are not, you become more visible to your purpose, your power, and your path. The silence around you is not emptiness, it's sacred space. The loneliness you feel is not rejection, it's preparation. You're being made whole in the quiet. You're being stripped so that nothing false can follow you into your next chapter. And yes, it can feel like death, but it's the death of the lie, not the soul. The people who walk away now were never meant to know the real you. They were attached to your wounds, your roles, your performance. Let them go without resentment. Their exit is your exodus. You are not meant to carry everyone forward. This is your spiritual reckoning, the moment your soul chooses authenticity over attachment, depth over acceptance, freedom over fitting in. And when you stand in the ashes of what once was, you'll begin to feel something new rise within you. Not just peace, but power. Not just clarity, but calling. And in time, you'll realize you were never losing anything. You were being rescued from a life that dimmed your light and a self that wasn't truly yours. 4. Phase 3. Entering the void. When the external world goes quiet and all the distractions disappear, you're left with a silence so deep it feels like a void, but it's in that very void where your soul begins to speak. At first, the stillness feels unbearable, even cruel, because we've been conditioned to equate noise with meaning and movement with progress. But as Carl Jung taught, the unconscious does not communicate through logic or words. It speaks through silence, symbols, and sensations. In this sacred stillness, you're not losing yourself. You're being stripped down to what is real, to the core of your spiritual identity. Everything that once defined you, your routines, your roles, your relationships, has been pulled away, not to punish you, but to reveal you. And now, without the clutter of the world's expectations, your soul has room to rise to the surface. This is not a phase of emptiness. It is one of incubation. Like a seed hidden in the darkness of the soil, something within you is breaking open, preparing to grow. But that growth cannot be rushed, and it cannot be forced through logic or willpower. It must be felt, endured, surrendered to. In this phase, your soul is reintroducing itself, not through loud epiphanies, but through subtle, intuitive nudges, dreams that stir something deep, emotions that seem to appear without explanation, moments of awareness that feel like déjà vu. This inner unfolding cannot happen while you're chasing validation, busy pleasing others, or lost in the chaos of daily life. That's why the universe had to shut it all down, not to harm you, but to help you return inward, where your soul has always been patiently waiting. Most people run from this space, labeling it depression, burnout, failure. But the few who choose to stay, who dare to face the discomfort of being with themselves, begin to awaken. The silence becomes sacred because it reveals truth, and truth is often quiet. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." In this sacred silence, you're not being punished. You're being prepared. You're not being abandoned. You're being aligned. This is the furnace of transformation, where illusions burn away and only essence remains. So while it may feel like you're doing nothing, like you're stuck or broken, you are in fact being rebuilt by forces far greater than your conscious mind. Your soul has called you here for a reason, and if you honor the stillness long enough, you will begin to hear the language it speaks. One of deeper knowing, one of purpose, one of peace that does not depend on anything outside of you. 5. Phase 4. Facing the shadow. With nowhere left to hide, you are finally brought face to face with the raw, unfiltered version of yourself, not the one shaped for survival, but the one quietly carrying unprocessed grief, buried anger, silent fears, and the repetitive patterns that have kept you trapped in cycles of pain. This moment is not a punishment. It is the beginning of truth. Carl Jung called this confrontation the meeting of the shadow, the hidden self that until now operated behind the curtain of your awareness. This is the version of you that held every suppressed emotion, every ignored wound, every truth that was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. And now, there's no running. You're not being punished by the universe. You're being invited to heal, not in theory, but in practice, not in abstract ideas, but in sacred confrontation. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That means your healing begins not by pretending to be okay, but by sitting in the storm and allowing yourself to feel without self-betrayal. This space of soul work is quiet, confronting, and holy. You begin to reclaim the parts of your soul you once disowned, to be accepted or to survive. You stop trying to fix the pain and instead learn to hold space for it, letting it breathe, cry, scream, and tell its story. It's in this space that your deepest pain reveals its hidden intelligence. You realize that you were never meant to carry it forever, but you do have to acknowledge it to release it. Just like a woman I once knew, who, after losing everything in a bitter divorce, found herself sitting in a silent apartment and talking to her own heart out loud. It felt strange at first naming each feeling, one by one, but in that moment of vulnerability, something broke open. She wasn't collapsing, she was awakening. She was no longer afraid of herself. That is what it means to spiritually grow, not to bypass the darkness, but to walk through it with your soul intact. Carl Jung warned that the shadow does not only carry our wounds, it also carries our hidden gifts, our power, and our truth that we buried to fit in. And so, facing the shadow is not a descent into self-hate, but a return to wholeness. You begin to see that your triggers are not weaknesses, they're directions. Your fear is not an enemy, it's a messenger. And your isolation is not a void, it's a sacred space where your real self begins to speak. You no longer chase validation or escape discomfort. You sit with it. You breathe with it. You learn from it. And slowly, the emotional storms that used to shake you begin to lose their grip. Not because life becomes easier, but because you've become more rooted in who you really are. You're no longer running from yourself. You're returning to yourself. This is the sacred ache of transformation, the soul remembering its depth, the quiet rebuilding of the inner temple. So if you're there now alone, confronting, feeling everything all at once, know that you're not failing. You're evolving, exactly as Carl Jung understood. This is what it means to reclaim your soul. 6. Phase 5. Inner transformation begins. Even when nothing seems to be changing on the outside, something profoundly spiritual is unfolding within you. Your breath slows, your nervous system softens, and you begin to rest deeper, not just physically, but emotionally and energetically. It's not because life suddenly became easy, but because your soul is learning to surrender to something greater than logic. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And now, more than ever, you're beginning to understand the truth of that. This inner transformation doesn't come with applause, recognition, or milestones you can post about. It comes in the quiet, in the stillness, in the space between who you used to be and who you are becoming. You're not just changing habits, you're shedding identities. The version of you that once chased noise, approval, and distractions is slowly dissolving. And in its place, something more sacred is growing. Presence, peace, inner truth. You begin to trust what cannot be seen. You stop needing proof to believe. You no longer wait for permission to feel worthy. The shift is subtle but seismic. You feel things more deeply. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You're not trying to win people anymore. You're trying to stay aligned with your soul. And this alignment, this spiritual recalibration, is what Carl Jung understood as individuation, the becoming of the self, the merging of the conscious with the unconscious. It feels like isolation, but it's actually intimacy with your essence. It feels like being forgotten, but it's really about remembering who you are. The old patterns, the outdated attachments, the wounds you once identified with, they're no longer compatible with the energy you're stepping into. You notice how much noise there used to be in your mind, and how quiet it's becoming, not because you're empty, but because you're finally full of your own presence. This is the sacred stillness before the emergence. No one claps for you here. There are no crowds in this room, but the divine is watching, and your soul is applauding in silence. You are being restructured, rebalanced, reawakened. You're no longer responding to the world from a place of fear or lack. You're learning how to live from your center, from your truth. This isn't just healing, it's preparation. And although it feels like you've been pulled away from everything familiar, you're actually being placed into alignment with everything meant for you. You're not stuck. You're being refined. You're not forgotten. You're being reborn. You're not broken. You're becoming whole. This invisible transformation is more powerful than anything you could force from the outside. It's not loud, but it's lasting. It's not public, but it's purposeful. So if all you're doing today is breathing differently, trusting quietly, and honoring what's rising inside you, you're doing enough. You're not falling apart. You're falling inward. 7. The deeper truth and your rebirth is here. This silence was never a void. It was the sacred womb where your soul began to take shape again. It wasn't abandonment. It was divine rearrangement. Life wasn't punishing you. It was positioning you. Your old life, no matter how familiar or deeply rooted, could no longer contain the vastness of who you're becoming. The people who drifted, the spaces that grew cold, and the doors that once opened so easily but now remain closed, none of it happened by accident. They were exits from a chapter that your soul had outgrown. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." That pain you felt? It wasn't pointless. It was the pressure before the birth of a truer self. Your breakdown was never destruction. It was divine design breaking through illusion, stripping away everything that no longer aligned with the depth of your purpose. And in this place of solitude, where the noise fades and the distractions disappear, you're forced to meet yourself. Not the self shaped by expectation or survival, but the self buried beneath years of compromise and silence. It's uncomfortable because transformation always is. The silence echoes with every unhealed wound, every dream you forgot to believe in, every truth you were too afraid to voice. But this is where the real work begins, not outside in the world, but inside, where your soul whispers things you were never still enough to hear. In this space, you're not meant to fight for your old life. You're meant to listen, to surrender, and to allow the light within you to rise. There is a sacred wisdom in this isolation that only those walking the spiritual path can understand. It is here you remember. You were never meant to be everything for everyone. You were meant to be fully, unapologetically aligned with your soul. The universe isolates those it is preparing to elevate, not to punish, but to purify. Not to exile, but to awaken. You're not in the middle of an ending. You're in the sacred pause between the inhale and exhale of a new beginning. What feels like separation is actually elevation. You are not being stripped bare without purpose. You are being readied for a life your former self could not carry. You are being molded to hold a deeper kind of love, a richer kind of peace, and a more radiant kind of truth. And though this phase can feel like spiritual exile, know this: it is the very space where soul and destiny meet. Something ancient in you remembers this. The silence is not your enemy. It is the sound of your becoming. The emptiness is not a void. It is a clearing for your emergence. So breathe into the stillness. Let the isolation do its work. Trust that your soul is wiser than your fear. Because your rebirth is not just coming, it is already here, unfolding in the quiet, beneath the surface, where only the brave dare to look. Thank you for spending this time with us on Spiritual Wisdom. Remember, the isolation you're experiencing is not a punishment. It's a sacred invitation to transform. As Carl Jung taught, true growth often begins in the quiet moments when the world seems to fall away. If this message has resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new insight on your path to awakening. Your journey matters, and you're never truly alone. The forbidden technique to activate your inner vision and see beyond the invisible. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. These powerful words from Carl Jung remind us that true sight begins within. In today's video from Spiritual Wisdom, we reveal a hidden technique Jung believed could unlock your inner sight, a way of seeing beyond the surface, into the soul of reality itself. This isn't just philosophy. It's a spiritual practice you can apply every day to deepen your awareness, awaken your intuition, and live with more clarity and purpose. Have you ever felt like there's more to this world than what meets the eye? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. As you watch, I invite you to reflect on what this means for your personal journey. And don't forget to share your insights in the comments below. Let's grow together. 1. You already have the inner vision. It's just dormant. You already have the inner vision. It's just dormant, not missing. This isn't about chasing a mystical power or developing something new. It's about remembering something ancient that your soul has always known. Inner vision is not a fantasy or vague idea. It is a real, spiritual faculty embedded in your human nature, like a third eye of perception that sees not with sight, but with understanding. You've used it before, even if you didn't realize it. It appeared in dreams that seemed to carry messages, in gut instincts that steered you away from danger, in that quiet inner knowing that whispered the truth before your mind caught up. This is the eye within the lens of the soul that sees through illusion and feels truth. But in today's world, filled with noise, distraction, and the endless chase for external validation, that inner clarity has been buried beneath years of conditioning. We've been taught to rely on logic, to prove everything with numbers, to doubt what we feel unless it's backed by facts. But the soul doesn't speak in statistics, it speaks in symbols, sensations, and silence. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He knew that the most profound transformations happen not by acquiring new information, but by turning inward and learning to listen again. He believed in the unconscious, not as something dark to be feared, but as a hidden reservoir of insight and spiritual truth. When you begin to reconnect with this part of yourself, you begin to reclaim a forgotten language, the language of the soul. Suddenly, patterns emerge where there used to be chaos. Coincidences turn into signs, and what once felt confusing starts to feel strangely familiar, like something inside you always knew the way. This inner vision is not a tool to manipulate the world. It is a mirror that reflects your deepest self. It allows you to navigate life from a place of quiet power, not reactive fear. And the more you trust it, the stronger it becomes. Each time you pause to feel, instead of rushing to analyze, each time you listen to the energy of a room, instead of just its words, you're activating that sacred lens again. You don't need to earn this gift. You just need to clear away the distractions that have caused you to forget it. And as you do, your soul begins to guide you, not through force, but through resonance. The truth is, this ability has always been within you, waiting patiently beneath the surface of your busy life. It doesn't need to be awakened by anything outside of you. It reawakens the moment you begin to believe in it again. And as that trust deepens, so does your clarity. You begin to sense things others miss. You start to feel the truth before it is spoken. You move not by impulse, but by alignment. The world hasn't changed, you have. because now you're seeing it through the eyes of the soul. Have you ever felt a moment of pure intuition, a gut feeling, or a dream that felt like a message? That's your inner vision speaking. If you've ever experienced it, share your story in the comments so others can be inspired. If not, comment, "I'm ready to remember." And let's awaken this ancient gift together. 2. Two parallel realities exist. Carl Jung taught that we move through not one, but two parallel realities: the visible world we touch and measure, and the invisible world we intuit and feel. These aren't fantasy or metaphor. They are different frequencies of truth, constantly overlapping in your daily life. You shift between them without realizing it when a dream speaks louder than logic, when a gut feeling keeps you from danger, or when a fleeting moment of déjà vu stops you in your tracks. Most people ignore these moments, dismiss them as coincidences, but they are anything but random. They are fragments of a deeper language, the language of the soul. Jung believed that learning to perceive the unseen consciously, not accidentally, unlocks a dimension of guidance and clarity that ordinary vision could never provide. And in a world obsessed with what can be seen, touched, or proven, this kind of sight is revolutionary. There was a man once, a tech executive in his mid-40s, who had everything success promised: a luxury home, career recognition, and financial security. But inside, he felt a growing hollowness he couldn't explain. No doctor could diagnose it. No promotion could fix it. Out of desperation, he picked up a journal and began recording his dreams, the suggestion he encountered in Jung's writings. At first, they were scattered images. But as the days passed, symbols began to emerge: a rusted gate, a silent child, a stairway descending into water. He didn't understand them logically, but he felt their pull. He started asking questions, not about his job or goals, but about his soul. Through this process, he realized he had abandoned parts of himself for years: his need for connection, his creative longing, his spiritual hunger. It wasn't the dreams that changed his life. It was that he finally listened to what had been speaking all along. This is what Jung meant by inner sight. Not a fantasy, but a shift in awareness so profound it reorders your entire reality. To perceive the unseen is to reclaim your birthright to wholeness. The world behind the world is not a place you visit. It's a part of you that has been patiently waiting to be remembered. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." And when you begin to trust that inner voice, those subtle nudges, those dreamlike insights, you no longer walk blind in the material world. You walk as someone who can see beneath the surface. Spiritual vision isn't dramatic, it's deliberate. It's the ability to discern truth when no one else sees it, to feel the invisible thread guiding your steps, and to understand that the soul knows things the mind cannot yet explain. Carl Jung didn't hide this technique in secrecy. He embedded it in the human experience. The real secret is that you've always had access to it, but only when you are willing to see with something deeper than your eyes. Begin where you are, listen more closely, and let the inner world speak. It already is. 3. The 3 pillars to awaken inner vision. To awaken your inner sight, you must return to the ancient wisdom that Carl Jung quietly preserved. A technique not designed for the masses, but for those brave enough to face themselves. He understood that spiritual vision is not something you acquire. It is something you uncover when the layers of noise, fear, and distraction are peeled away. The first key is conscious silence, not just quietness, but the sacred space between thoughts, where the soul whispers. In that stillness, you begin to witness the workings of your own mind without judgment. You notice how thought clings to fear, how memories rise and fall like waves, and how awareness, when separated from noise, reveals a deeper truth. Jung knew that true insight only arises when the mind stops trying to fix, solve, or escape, and instead simply observes. The second practice is sacred breathing, a forgotten art in the modern world. Every breath you take is not just oxygen, it is spirit, presence, and life force. When you breathe intentionally, slowly, fully, you step out of linear time and into eternal presence. This breath becomes your anchor when emotions surge or the mind races. Spiritual traditions across the world, whether in yogic pranayama, Buddhist mindfulness, or Christian contemplative prayer, have used breath to bridge the conscious and unconscious, the earthly and the divine. Jung saw breath as the threshold between the seen and unseen, a path inward where symbols, dreams, and archetypes begin to emerge. Then comes directed focus, the most difficult and the most liberating. In a culture built on distraction, learning to focus your attention is a revolutionary act. It means choosing what you see, rather than being hijacked by what demands your attention. Directed focus turns your awareness into a spiritual spotlight, burning through illusion, conditioning, and self-deception. Jung warned that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But when you learn to focus not on the outer world, but the inner landscape you begin to see through the false self, the mask, the persona, you begin to see with your soul. And when these three pillars of conscious silence, sacred breathing, and directed focus work together, something miraculous happens. You don't just perceive reality differently. Reality itself begins to shift. Patterns become visible, intuition strengthens, synchronicities multiply, and a deep sense of inner guidance emerges. This is not a hallucination, it's clarity. It's what Jung called the individuation process, the soul's journey toward wholeness, where the spiritual and psychological become one. And though this path is not easy, it is real. It is ancient. It is yours. 4. The SCP breathing ritual unlocks deeper consciousness. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And hidden within this wisdom lies a profound spiritual invitation to reconnect with the vision of the soul. The SCP breathing ritual, a sacred 7-breath technique, is not just a meditative practice, but a powerful gateway into deeper states of consciousness that modern science still struggles to fully explain. It begins with the simple act of relaxing the body, yet its effects ripple far beyond physical ease. With each breath, the noise of the world fades, and your awareness begins to sharpen, not in a way that tightens your focus, but in a way that expands your perception. The first 2 breaths gently disarm the nervous system, signaling safety and release. By the 3rd breath, your emotional guard begins to lower, and subtle sensations begin to rise. Energy shifts, a light pressure behind the eyes, or an inner stillness that feels strangely familiar, like returning to a truth you once knew but forgot. As the 4th and 5th breaths flow through you, something mystical begins to happen. Many experience a tingling sensation at the center of the forehead, the energetic zone long associated with the third eye or inner sight. But this is more than a metaphor. This is the symbolic ignition of the soul's true perception, the moment your inner eye begins to stir and perceive not just with logic, but with intuitive clarity. In these breath-spaced seconds, you're not escaping reality, but entering into its deeper layers. You begin to sense that there is more meaning, more alignment, more presence hidden just beneath the surface of daily life. The sixth breath invites you into a state of deep receptivity, where the mind no longer needs to control and the heart becomes the guide. The soul begins to speak in feelings, images, and quiet knowings. And with the seventh breath, the veil thins. The inner and outer world meet, and you experience not an escape, but an arrival, a homecoming to yourself, where insights arise naturally and with grace. This technique holds the power to reconnect you with the source of your being. For men who have spent decades solving, fixing, planning, and performing, it is a return to pure presence. It teaches that the answers aren't outside of you in systems or structures, but within you, waiting to be remembered by the part of your soul that never forgot. Jung understood that true transformation requires this inner awakening, a direct experience that transcends words and theories. The SCP ritual is not superstition. It is sacred science, a bridge between breath and being, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. And with each inhale, you reclaim a part of yourself that was never lost, only buried beneath the noise. The ritual reminds you that to truly see is not to stare harder at the world, but to surrender into the vision that has been looking out from within you all along. 5. The blind spot of consciousness is a gateway. Carl Jung believed that there exists a sacred threshold between waking and sleeping, a blind spot of consciousness that modern life has nearly erased. This mysterious in-between state is not a void, but a gateway, where the noise of the external world fades and the whispers of the soul begin to rise. In that soft space where thoughts begin to dissolve, where the mind loosens its grip on control, your inner vision sharpens. You cannot force your way into this state. It opens only when approached with stillness and surrender. Jung understood that the unconscious speaks not through logic, but through symbols, silence, and sensations. And it is in these quiet gaps, those fragile pauses between one thought and the next, that something ancient begins to surface. This is the place where healing begins, not by doing more, but by being fully present. When you simply observe your thoughts without reacting to them, without naming them or chasing them, you enter a sacred presence that leads beyond the intellect into spiritual awareness. In the modern world, we rarely notice these moments because we're conditioned to believe that insight only comes from thinking harder or doing more. But the most profound realizations are not found in noise. They arise in the silent transitions that we so often overlook. Consider a man in his 40s named Daniel, a father of 3 who works long hours in a stressful corporate job. For years, he battled insomnia, anxiety, and a constant feeling of being disconnected. Therapy helped, but something was missing. One evening, instead of numbing himself with late-night TV, he decided to just lie in bed with his eyes closed and watch his thoughts float by. No judgment, no resistance, just breath and awareness. At first, it felt foreign, like nothing was happening. But slowly, within those moments of still attention, a strange calm began to rise. His breath slowed, his muscles softened, and then, from the quiet, an image emerged of his childhood home, a long-forgotten memory, followed by a deep emotional release. He wasn't dreaming, and he wasn't awake. He had entered what Carl Jung described as the threshold space of the unconscious, where the soul begins to show you what the ego has hidden. This practice is not mystical nonsense. It's a return to something ancient that modern society has taught us to ignore. The blind spot of consciousness is the bridge between your rational mind and your deeper truth. You access it not through effort, but through gentle awareness. When you surrender to this space, you begin to understand why Jung emphasized the necessity of looking inward. This is where individuation begins, where the fragments of your identity start to integrate. The soul doesn't speak in noise, it speaks in silence, in images, in felt sense. And you've felt it before those moments before sleep, when a solution appears out of nowhere, or when a gut feeling tells you something your logic never could. That's the gateway. That's the sacred portal Carl Jung wanted us to reclaim. And when you honor it, when you stop forcing and start listening, something powerful happens. You begin to see not with your eyes, but with your soul. Don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom on accessing the silent spaces of consciousness where the unseen becomes clear and true inner vision begins to awaken. 6. Brain waves are the pathways to inner worlds. Your brain is not just a tool for thinking, it is a bridge, a frequency tuner, a spiritual antenna. All day long, it shifts between different states of what science calls brain waves. But Carl Jung understood something deeper. These waves are not just physical rhythms. They are access points to inner dimensions. When you're alert and focused, you're in beta. But when you're calm, creative, or slipping into sleep, your brain enters alpha and theta. And it is in these slower states where something profound begins to happen. The veil between your conscious mind and your unconscious starts to thin, and through that crack, the soul speaks. Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." That awakening happens when you're still enough to feel it. In the moments before sleep, in meditation, in daydreams, your intuition sharpens, synchronicities appear, visions surface. These aren't fantasies. They are glimpses into a deeper spiritual reality that's always been with you, waiting for you to slow down enough to notice. This is why people throughout history, mystics, monks, shamans, have used breathwork, chanting, stillness, and ritual, not to escape reality, but to tune their minds into these receptive states. When you're in theta, your brain moves slowly, and in that space, your inner world becomes vivid. It's where healing happens, where repressed memories rise, where you remember truths you've long forgotten. And when you stay in that state long enough, you don't just see visions, you begin to understand your life differently. You see patterns instead of problems. You feel energy instead of confusion. You trust your gut because your soul has become louder than your fear. This isn't just spiritual theory. Neuroscience now confirms what ancient teachers and Jung always knew. The mind, when trained and calmed, unlocks pathways into a greater intelligence. These brain waves are not accidents. They are invitations. You've already felt it, those moments when time slowed, when your heart whispered something true, when the outside world faded and your inner world lit up. That was the door. And the more you learn to ride those waves, not fight them, the more often that door opens. Meditation, breath work, Intentional rest, visualization, all of these help you stabilize in that state. And once you do, your perception begins to shift. You become more awake in your sleep, more lucid in your day, more centered in your chaos. The outer world won't always change, but the way you see it will. You won't just react to life, you'll begin to read it like a sacred text. That is the power of brainwaves, when you understand them not just as biology, but as spiritual keys. The technique Jung hinted at was never complicated. It was simply forgotten. But now you remember, and now you see. 7. You must face the 4 inner guardians. Doubt is the first threshold guardian that rises when the soul begins to awaken an echo in the mind that questions not only the path you're on, but whether the path even exists at all. It whispers with surgical precision, challenging your beliefs, your intentions, and even your right to pursue deeper truth. But doubt is not here to destroy your journey. It's here to purify it. It asks whether you are seeking truth for the sake of power or for the sake of transformation. If you cannot face your doubt and move through it with clarity and humility, it will turn your spiritual quest into an intellectual game. But if you allow doubt to refine your inner compass, it sharpens your discernment and makes your soul less susceptible to illusion. And once you've crossed that line, fear steps forward, not just fear of failure, but fear of dissolution, the kind that haunts men who sense their identity unraveling. Fear is the soul's alarm bell when you begin shedding your false selves. It warns you that you are entering territory where logic has no dominion and the ego no longer rules. This fear isn't irrational, it's ancient. It's the soul's trembling in the face of immense expansion. But expansion always begins with contraction. You must lose your grip on certainty to open your hand to mystery. Impatience then comes cloaked in urgency. It is the hunger to arrive before the journey has done its work. It pushes you to demand results from processes that were never meant to be rushed. The modern mind is conditioned to expect spiritual experiences like fast food, quick, cheap, and instantly gratifying. But the soul does not bloom on demand. Its wisdom is slow-cooked in silence, time, and surrender. Impatience will cause you to mistake early insights for full awakenings, temporary calm for lasting peace. But when you breathe through it, you begin to realize that spiritual maturity is not a destination, it's a rhythm. One that honors pauses, setbacks, and stillness as much as breakthroughs. And then, when you've made progress, when visions emerge and intuition deepens, you meet the final guardian spiritual ego. It arrives not as a warning, but as a reward, telling you that you've ascended, that you've seen more than others, that your awakening makes you chosen. And in that moment, you risk falling further than you ever did at the beginning. Because the soul doesn't awaken to be admired, it awakens to serve. The deeper you see, the more invisible you must become. The higher you climb, the more rooted you must stay. Spiritual ego turns sacred vision into performance and turns you from a vessel into a performer. If you don't see this trap, you'll confuse elevation with enlightenment. These 4 guardians, doubt, fear, impatience, and ego, are not your enemies. They are sacred filters through which only the sincere can pass. They test your readiness to truly see, not with the eyes in your head, but with the eyes of the soul. Each one strips you of what is false so that only the essence remains. Your soul's vision is not something you acquire. It is something you remember once the noise has been cleared. Jung understood this. That's why he buried this technique within the fabric of his teachings, revealing it only to those ready to hear without their ears and see without their eyes. Because true spiritual sight doesn't just reveal the world, it transforms the man who sees it. As you confront these four inner guardians, remember they are not here to block you, but to refine you. Your willingness to meet doubt, fear, impatience, and ego with courage is what sets you apart. If you've recognized even one of these within yourself, comment, "I am ready to face my inner guardians," as a sign of your readiness. Your journey through spiritual awakening is unfolding, and this step marks your deeper commitment. Let's keep walking together. 8. Awakening happens in layers and can't be forced. The moment of awakening, as Carl Jung understood, is never loud or theatrical. It's quiet, intimate, and profoundly personal. It rarely arrives all at once, but instead reveals itself in layers, each one peeling back another illusion you once believed was part of you. You may feel a sudden shift in the world, appearing more colorful, time slowing, or a deep knowing that bypasses logic. But these moments are not the full picture. They're invitations. And these invitations cannot be forced open through effort or desperation. Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." This is the heart of spiritual awakening. Surrender, not struggle. The more you try to demand clarity, the more it eludes you. Because awakening comes not when you chase it, but when you become quiet enough to receive it. Think of it like a fog lifting from your inner world, not all at once, but gradually, as your soul allows more light to seep in. Each layer you shed, whether it's fear, ego, or the need for control, brings you closer to your essence. In a culture obsessed with speed and visible transformation, this kind of inner journey might seem slow or uneventful, but it's the most powerful change you will ever undergo. It's not about learning something new. It's about remembering what was buried beneath the noise. The spiritual path is not linear. You don't get from point A to point B in a straight line. Some days, you'll feel awake and wise. Other days, you'll feel lost again. That's part of the spiral. Jung would remind us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and that journey cannot be rushed. There's a man in his mid-40s who spent years chasing enlightenment, meditating in temples, reading sacred texts, trying every breathwork and ritual he could find. Still, nothing felt real. But one day, while watching his daughter play in silence, something clicked. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't trying. He was just there. And in that moment, he felt something he had never felt during all his spiritual practices. Peace. A quiet, complete, unquestionable peace. That moment didn't come from effort. It came from presence. Carl Jung would call this a return to the self, the soul's remembrance of its own truth, untainted by the projections of the world. The soul does not respond to force. It opens through invitation, through trust, through time. Like a flower blooming at dawn, it cannot be hurried, only witnessed. Every time you let go of the need to control the process, you align more deeply with your essence. And when you finally stop chasing awakening as a goal, it reveals itself as your natural state. Carl Jung didn't give us a map. He gave us a mirror. And in that mirror, we see not who we were told to be, but who we have always been. So let every silence teach you. Let every layer you release bring you home. Let your soul unfold not because you force it, but because you finally allow it. 9. Integration is the real mastery. After awakening, the illusion that you've reached the summit is seductive, but the real journey begins when you try to live your life from that new awareness. Carl Jung made it clear. True spiritual growth is not about escaping into visions or dwelling in the abstract. It's about what you do with that vision in the real world, how you bring the light of your consciousness into the shadows of your daily habits, your relationships, your reactions. Integration is the real mastery. You don't become spiritually evolved just because you've seen something divine. You evolve when you learn how to embody that vision in traffic, in heartbreak, in uncertainty, in work, in silence. That's where the work begins. Journaling isn't just reflection, it's a spiritual technology. It helps you slow down the noise of the ego, make sense of emotions, and track the way your inner world responds to the outer. It turns chaos into clarity. It turns intuition into insight. You begin to notice the rhythms of your soul, speaking louder than the world's noise. Emotional balance becomes sacred because once your inner sight is open, you start to feel everything. Energies in the room, subtle tension in people's voices, the emotional undercurrent behind their words. You no longer get to numb yourself to protect your comfort. Instead, you're invited to develop spiritual resilience, the ability to stay open without losing yourself. And this is where protecting your energy becomes non-negotiable. It's not about cutting people off in ego. It's about honoring the new frequency you now live in. You can't carry old dynamics into a new dimension of self. Not everyone deserves access to the version of you that's been rebuilt through fire and revelation. Grounding becomes your compass. Not because you're afraid of flying too high, but because the point was never to escape the world, it was to be able to walk through it awake. True mastery is never about floating in light. It's about standing in it while you hold space for others who are still in the dark, and doing so without draining your own flame. You walk differently, speak differently. You listen with your whole being. You see through the lens of the soul. And yet, you still show up fully human, paying bills, raising kids, feeling grief, choosing love. That's the paradox of integration. You are both the witness and the participant, the healer and the hurting, the light and the lamp. You don't abandon your humanity, you become its guardian. The measure of your spiritual growth is not how high you ascend, but how deeply you root your soul into the messiness of life and still radiate presence. You're not here to transcend, you're here to transmute. And in doing so, your life becomes the invisible teaching that touches others without a word. To affirm your commitment to living your awakening, not just seeing it declare your intention. Comment below. I integrate with presence to honor your journey and inspire others to bring spiritual wisdom into everyday life. Thank you for joining us on this eye-opening journey into the depths of Carl Jung's hidden technique to awaken your inner sight. Whether you're just beginning your spiritual path or deep into the process of self-discovery, remember what you seek is already within you, waiting patiently to be seen. If today's video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next revelation we share. Until next time, stay awake, stay curious, and trust the wisdom of your soul.